Friends, let's talk about free practice, which even had a little issue on F1 television with the Formula One data in general. So we had some bugs like this one you're seeing on your screen right now. Now, only Vest, who is one of the rookies, went out on track in this first session. In this case, only he left the pit, only he drove on the track, and he reached 47 km/h as his top speed in Formula One. Of course, that's a bug that happened in the system, but we already have some relevant information. So I'll get into other details, starting with the team's upgrades, because yes, some teams have upgrades. Williams, for example, added new cooling inlets on the engine cover. What is expected for the Mexican Grand Prix? You have the same thing with Stake 2, right? Sauber. In the case of V-Carb, they mentioned that it's chippy. You also have modifications on the engine cover, specifically for cooling. On Ferrari, you have a new rear duct, and also on the engine cover, a new cooling system. Exactly as I said. For Mexico, it's important because the air is thin there. You have a modification of about 20% in terms of the car's effect, the car's downforce, and also in cooling. It makes a big difference. Alpine, same as the others, also made modifications for the car's cooling. Red Bull is where the details are, okay? Red Bull has a major update, the real update here, which makes a big difference. On the front duct, engine cover for cooling. This floor update is really significant. This update is here because Red Bull is chasing McLaren. Yes, according to Lohamex, they're sacrificing 2026. In the image you're seeing now that the race put up, you can see the difference between the old floor, which is the one on top, and the new floor below. You can see that the one below has a bigger rounding in that lower green part compared to the old floor. And there's also a slight modification in this part, let's say the fins underneath. Yes, changes at Red Bull. We discussed earlier this week that Red Bull would have an update. And in this case, already at the Grand Prix itself, these are the team's upgrades for the Grand Prix. In the first free practice, as I mentioned to you, we had several rookies, 9 actually. So you'll see on your screen, for example, that the fastest among them was Lindblad from Red Bull, and there are a lot of expectations around Lindblad, right? He might even be at Racing Bulls next year. He was the best of the rookies. Then you'll have Padawad from McLaren as the second best rookie, followed by Vest, Paul Aron, Hirakawa, Asa Browning, and Crownford. And Fuoco was making a Ferrari sandwich since Leclerc was leading. The teams are making the most of the season's end since the championship is basically decided. Free Practice 1 is a free practice session that, as I always tell you, is less important for the teams over the weekend than Free Practice 2, and it's also a very peculiar track. So since there aren't any major updates for anyone, only for Red Bull and so on, do you have this session with a lot of rookies? Actually, the only team with both main drivers was Sauber. See Hülkenberg in third and Bortoleto? Still talking about FP, one of the few pieces of data we have is actually the best sectors. Antonelli was fastest in the first, Hülkenberg in the second, and Leclerc in the third. Notice that Leclerc stays consistent across all 3 sectors, while Antonelli, for example, falls off significantly in the third sector. Hülkenberg struggles in the first and third sectors, similar to Bortoleto, who is only strong in the second. He struggles in the first sector, gets better in the second, and excels in the third. You can see that overall, Leclerc was the most consistent driver in this sector game, which justifies his first position on the final table. However, a major problem with F1 television prevented collecting much data. In FP2, Max Verstappen led and ended Friday as the fastest. There are also some interesting details. Check the table. Leclerc is performing well again. Antonelli, Norris, Hamilton, Russell, Tsunoda, and Piastri are near the bottom of the standings. Those guys we're already used to, right? Gasly and Albon, not really, but Colapinto, Berman, Hülkenberg, Bortoleto, Rajar, it's not too surprising. As I always say, free practice isn't conclusive, just an indicator. Depending on FP, 3 teams may still adjust their cars, so the baseline is set, but FP3 can still bring changes. The main detail is when we look at the long runs in a basic way. Because we don't have the concrete data yet, I'm recording this right after FP2 ended, so we still don't have that more concrete data. But from what we were seeing in Formula One, the lap times that you keep following there, right? Calmly, lap by lap and all, you end up noticing that McLaren isn't that strong after all. Mercedes and Ferrari can, yes, be teams that at first will give McLaren a hard time, which is terrible for them. It's really bad. Some of you told me on Twitter that the Piastri, for example, had a lot of oversteer. You can see that McLaren is trying to find themselves. It still seems like the car really isn't in the driver's hands anymore. And this not being in the driver's hands has been a big problem and could be an issue in Mexico. If McLaren slips up, they'll lose a qualifying and a race behind Mercedes and Ferrari. And that would be a total disaster, considering that Verstappen could come on very strong and is expected to come on very strong. On this track in Mexico, which is a track he dominates, he has 5 wins on this specific track. And remember that starting from pole position has a 45% success rate in converting to victory, while starting second is actually behind even the third place starter. Third place has a 25% win rate and second place about 16% for conversions to victory. So you can see that qualifying is very important, and not having the pace can definitely be very dangerous for McLaren, so the situation doesn't look very good for them. Verstappen, with the upgrade, now has a car that was already strong from previous upgrades and is apparently much more comfortable on Friday. And being more comfortable, it can create quite a problem. Looking at the midfield group, Williams, I believe, is going to come in very strong for this Grand Prix. Aston Martin tends to do poorly in Grand Prix races where top speed is important, like on the Mexico track. However, it's also a high downforce track because of the thin air, right? So how will teams avoid air resistance? They can have a very fast car on the straights, even with a very aggressive wing setup. I still expect Williams to stand out in midfield as Aston Martin falls further behind. That group, Alonso, Sainz and Stroll, likely won't happen, at least not initially. It's hard to say anything for sure about Sauber, Haas, Alpine or Bulls. These are teams that are always mixing it up too much, always bumping into each other too much, so it's hard to take sides for one or the other. But anyway, there's a really good expectation for qualifying, and tomorrow we'll see what happens, especially in terms of performance. Pura has FP3 and qualifying. See you tomorrow in both Saturday videos. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss anything. A big hug, thanks, and see you.